Picture this. You wake up before dawn to the sound of obsidian blades being sharpened, not for your breakfast, but potentially for your heart. Welcome to the Mayan Empire, where your morning coffee is replaced with fermented corn gruel. Your biggest worry isn't traffic, it's whether today's the day the gods demand a little extra blood tribute, and your life expectancy makes a mayfly look optimistic. Think you could handle a day in one of history's most sophisticated civilizations? Think again. Turn those lights down, maybe flip on that fan for some white noise, because we're about to explore exactly why 24 hours in the Maya world would leave you begging for the comfort of a Monday morning commute. Let's start your day as a Maya commoner, shall we? It's approximately 4 a.m. by our modern reckoning, though you wouldn't know that because time, like everything else in Maya society, belongs to the gods and the priests who interpret their will. The first thing that hits you isn't the tropical humidity or the sounds of the jungle awakening. It's the realization that you've been sleeping on a reed mat that makes a medieval peasant's straw bed look like a luxury mattress. Your back aches in ways you didn't know were possible, and that's before you've even attempted to stand up. Your home, if we can call it that, is a single-room hut made of wooden poles, mud plaster, and topped with a thatched roof that leaks just enough to keep you perpetually damp, but not enough to actually wash away the accumulated grime. The floor is packed earth that turns to mud during the rainy season and concrete hard dust during dry spells. There are no windows in the way you'd understand them, just gaps in the walls that let in insects, small animals, and the occasional curious neighbor. You share this palatial estate with your entire extended family. Privacy is a concept that won't be invented for another 1,000 years, and personal space is measured in inches rather than feet. Your sleeping area is defined by the length of your mat and not much else. Children cry, adults snore, and somewhere in the darkness, someone is definitely doing something that makes you question the wisdom of close-knit family living. The first order of business is relieving yourself, which brings us to one of the more colorful aspects of Maya daily life. Forget about bathrooms, toilets, or even outhouses. You're looking at a trip to the designated area outside the settlement, armed with nothing more than some corn husks and the hope that you won't encounter anything with more teeth than you have. The Maya had sophisticated knowledge of astronomy, mathematics, and architecture, but indoor plumbing apparently wasn't on their priority list. Once you've handled that delicate matter, it's time for breakfast. And here's where things get interesting in the worst possible way. Your morning meal consists of atole, a thin gruel made from ground corn that has the consistency of wallpaper paste and roughly the same flavor. If you're particularly fortunate, there might be some chili peppers mixed in to give it that special burning sensation that'll remind you of home for the rest of the day. But here's the kicker. This corn isn't just any corn. It's been treated with lime in a process called nixtamalization, which sounds fancy, but essentially means your food has been soaked in caustic chemicals. The Maya discovered this process made the corn more nutritious and easier to digest. But it also means your breakfast has a distinctive alkaline taste that makes baking soda seem flavorful by comparison. Water is another adventure entirely. You're not getting it from a tap, a well, or even a clean stream. Most Maya settlements relied on cenotes, those natural limestone sinkholes filled with water that may or may not be shared with various aquatic creatures, decomposing organic matter, and the occasional human sacrifice from centuries past. The water you're drinking has been sitting in a limestone cavern, brewing its own special cocktail of minerals, bacteria, and whatever else happens to fall in from above. Speaking of falling in, cenotes weren't just water sources. They were sacred spaces where the Maya believed they could communicate with the rain god. Chok. This means your daily water supply doubles as a religious site where priests regularly conducted ceremonies that involved throwing in jade, gold, copal incense, and yes, people. So every sip of water carries with it the distinct possibility that you're consuming something that was once considered a suitable offering to the gods. Now that you've hydrated with sacrificial groundwater and breakfasted on chemical corn paste, it's time to get dressed. Maya fashion for commoners was refreshingly simple, primarily because you didn't have much choice in the matter. Men wore a loincloth called an X, which is exactly what it sounds like. A strip of cloth wrapped around the waist and between the legs. Women wore a hupil, essentially a rectangular piece of cloth with holes cut for the head and arms. These garments were made from cotton or maguey fiber, both of which became incredibly uncomfortable when wet, which in the tropical Maya climate means most of the time. Footwear was for the wealthy and the warriors. Your feet are going to get acquainted with every thorn, stone, insect, and sharp object between your hut and wherever you're going. The Maya had sandals made from woven plant fibers or animal hide, but as a commoner, you're not likely to own a pair. Your feet will develop calluses thick enough to stop small projectiles, but until then, every step is an adventure in pain management. Personal hygiene presents its own unique challenges. The Maya valued cleanliness and bathed regularly, which sounds great until you realize that your bathing facilities consist of whatever body of water happens to be nearby. This might be a river shared with caimans, a cenote with unknown depths and contents, or a constructed basin that serves the entire community. Privacy during bathing was not a consideration, and the water temperature was whatever nature provided, which in the Maya lowlands means uncomfortably warm most of the time. Soap, as you know it, didn't exist. Instead, you'd use a plant called soapberry or various other natural cleansers that provided some cleaning action but nothing approaching the effectiveness of modern hygiene products. Your hair would be washed with the same plant-based solutions, assuming you had time for such luxuries between your daily survival tasks. By now, the sun is beginning to rise, and it's time to begin your workday. As a Maya commoner, your job options are limited, but consistently backbreaking. If you're a farmer, and statistically, you probably are, since about 90% of Maya were agricultural workers. Your day involves heading out to your milpa, the small plot of land where you practice slash-and-burn agriculture. This isn't the romantic vision of working the land that modern people might imagine. Maya agriculture was intensive, labor-intensive, and entirely dependent on reading natural signs that could mean the difference between eating and starving. You're working with tools made from stone, wood, and obsidian. Your plow is a digging stick. Your harvesting equipment consists of your hands and whatever cutting implements you can fashion from available materials. The crops you're growing require constant attention. Corn, beans, and squash, the famous three sisters of Maya agriculture, each have their own needs and growing cycles. The corn needs to be planted at exactly the right time relative to the rains, protected from insects and animals, and harvested before it spoils. The beans need support structures made from available wood. The squash spreads across the ground, requiring you to navigate carefully to avoid damaging the vines. But here's where it gets really interesting. Maya agricultural success wasn't just about understanding plants and weather. It was about understanding the complex religious calendar that determined when specific activities could be performed. Planting, harvesting, and even clearing land had to be done on auspicious days according to the Maya calendar system. Get the timing wrong, and you're not just risking crop failure, you're risking divine displeasure. The Maya calendar wasn't a simple annual cycle like modern calendars. It was a complex interlocking system of multiple cycles. including a 260-day sacred calendar and a 365-day solar calendar, which combined to create a 52-year cycle called the calendar round. But even that wasn't the end of it. The Maya also tracked longer cycles, including the famous long count that recorded dates from a mythical creation date thousands of years in the past. As a farmer, you needed to understand enough of this system to know when to plant and when to harvest. But you also needed to know when to participate in religious ceremonies that would ensure the gods looked favorably on your crops. Miss a ceremony, and your neighbors might blame the subsequent drought on your negligence. Participate too enthusiastically, and you might find yourself selected for more intensive religious participation than you'd prefer. The heat is building now, and we're only a few hours into your Maya day. The tropical sun in the Maya lowlands isn't the pleasant warmth of a beach vacation. It's an oppressive, humid heat that saps your strength and makes every physical task exponentially more difficult. You're sweating constantly, losing salt and water that you'll struggle to replace with your limited diet and questionable water sources. Your clothing, such as it is, becomes soaked with perspiration and clings uncomfortably to your skin. The cotton or maguey fiber becomes heavy and chafing when wet, creating friction points that will develop into sores if you're not careful. The humidity means nothing ever really dries, so you're essentially living in damp clothing that smells increasingly interesting as the day progresses. Working in this heat with primitive tools means your hands are developing blisters that will become calluses if you survive long enough. The wooden handles of your tools become slippery with sweat, making them difficult to grip securely. The obsidian blades, while incredibly sharp, are also brittle and prone to chipping or breaking at precisely the wrong moment, often taking pieces of your skin with them. By mid-morning, you're already exhausted, dehydrated, and questioning every life choice that brought you to this moment. But this is just the beginning. You still have to deal with the political structure of Maya society, the religious obligations that could literally cost you your life, the constant threat of warfare, and the complex social hierarchies that determine your fate. The Maya weren't just farmers and pyramid builders. They were people living in a sophisticated but unforgiving civilization where stepping out of line could result in exile, slavery, or worse. Every interaction with someone of higher social status was fraught with the potential for disaster. Say the wrong thing to a noble, fail to show proper respect to a priest, or simply be in the wrong place at the wrong time during a religious ceremony, and you're already challenging, life could become exponentially worse. Before we continue with more of your increasingly uncomfortable day in the Maya Empire, let's take a moment to check in with our community. Where are you listening from tonight? What time is it in your corner of the world? If you're truly enjoying these journeys through history's more uncomfortable moments, a like and subscribe would mean the world to us, but only if these stories genuinely help you unwind. Drop a comment and let us know what historical period you'd like us to explore next, or just say hello and tell us how your night is going. You're an important part of our growing community of history enthusiasts who appreciate the quieter, more detailed stories from the past. Thank you for being part of our little corner of the internet, and for your continued support as we explore these fascinating, if uncomfortable, historical realities together. Now, where were we? Ah yes, your deteriorating situation in Maya society. Let's talk about the social structure you're navigating, because understanding your place in Maya civilization is crucial to understanding why survival is such a challenge. At the bottom of the social pyramid, where you find yourself, are the commoners, or Walab. You're the farmers, laborers, artisans, and servants who make up the vast majority of Maya society. Above you are the nobles, or Amahanab, who own the land you work and control most aspects of your daily life. At the very top sits the Jaguar, the divine king, whose word is literally law and whose displeasure could mean death. But it's not just a simple three-tier system. Maya society was incredibly complex, with numerous subdivisions and specializations within each class. There were different types of commoners: farmers, craftspeople, servants, and laborers, each with their own specific roles and limitations. There were different levels of nobility, from local administrators to regional governors to members of the royal family. And there were specialized roles like priests, warriors, scribes, and traders, who might have high status but not necessarily political power. Your position in this hierarchy determines everything: where you can live, what you can wear, who you can marry, what foods you can eat, and even how you're allowed to die. As a commoner, you're subject to tribute obligations, labor requirements, and military service as demanded by your local noble. Fail to meet these obligations, and the consequences range from increased tribute demands to physical punishment to being sold into slavery. The tribute system is particularly burdensome. You're required to provide a portion of your crops, your labor, and your craft production to your local noble, who passes a portion up the chain to regional administrators, who pass a portion to the king. This means that a significant percentage of everything you produce never actually benefits you or your family. You're working not just to survive, but to support an entire hierarchical structure that sees you as a resource to be exploited. Labor obligations could be called up at any time. Maybe the local noble wants to build a new palace, or the king has decided to construct another temple, or there's a road that needs to be built through the jungle. When the call comes, you drop whatever you're doing and report for duty. These projects could last weeks or months, taking you away from your own agricultural work precisely when your crops need the most attention. Military service presents its own special challenges. Maya warfare wasn't the romanticized combat of Hollywood movies. It was brutal, personal, and often focused on capturing prisoners for sacrifice rather than killing enemies outright. Warriors fought with obsidian-edged clubs, spears, and atlatls, spear throwers, wearing cotton armor that provided some protection but was heavy and uncomfortable to wear. As a commoner pressed into military service, you're not getting the best equipment or the most training. You're essentially cannon fodder, expected to fill out the ranks and absorb enemy attacks, while the professional warriors and nobles engage in the real fighting. Your chances of survival depend more on luck than skill, and even if you survive the battle, you might not survive the victory celebration, which often involved sacrificing prisoners of war. The religious obligations are perhaps the most terrifying aspect of Maya life. The Maya cosmos was populated by gods who demanded regular offerings and ceremonies to maintain the proper functioning of the universe. These offerings ranged from simple gifts of food and flowers to elaborate ceremonies involving human sacrifice. As a commoner, you're expected to participate in community religious observances, contribute to temple maintenance, and provide offerings according to your ability. But you're also potential material for more intensive religious participation. The Maya practiced various forms of human sacrifice, including heart extraction, drowning, arrows, and ritual decapitation. While nobles and prisoners of war were often preferred victims, commoners could be selected for sacrifice during particularly important ceremonies or when the gods seemed displeased with current offerings. The selection process for sacrifice wasn't random. It was often based on religious calendar calculations, physical characteristics deemed favorable by the priests, or simply being in the wrong place when the gods demanded satisfaction. Children were sometimes selected for sacrifice to the rain god Chok, particularly during droughts when more desperate measures were needed to ensure rainfall. Even if you avoided being selected for sacrifice, religious obligations required significant time and resource investments. You needed to participate in fasting periods, ritual bloodletting ceremonies where you pierced your tongue or other body parts with obsidian blades or stingray spines, and community festivals that could last for days and required contributions of food, labor, and craft goods. The Maya practiced ritual bloodletting as a form of communication with the gods. This wasn't a symbolic gesture. It was actual bloodletting using sharp instruments to pierce soft tissues and collect blood for offering. Both men and women participated, though the specific body parts pierced varied by gender and social status. The pain was considered necessary for establishing proper communication with the divine realm, but the risk of infection, excessive bleeding, and other complications made these rituals genuinely dangerous. Your daily life is also complicated by the Maya writing system and your inability to read it. The Maya developed one of the most sophisticated writing systems in the pre-Columbian Americas, using a combination of logographic and syllabic symbols to record everything from historical events to astronomical observations to tribute obligations. But literacy was restricted to the elite classes, nobles, priests, and specialized scribes. This means you're living in a society where important information about laws, obligations, ceremonies, and social expectations is recorded in a writing system you can't read. You depend entirely on oral communication and visual cues to understand what's expected of you. Misunderstand an announcement from a noble, miss a change in tribute requirements, or fail to recognize a new religious obligation, and you could find yourself in serious trouble. The market system presents its own challenges. Maya communities had regular markets, where goods were exchanged using a barter system supplemented by cacao beans as a form of currency. As a commoner, you have limited goods to trade and limited ability to travel to distant markets where more exotic goods might be available. Your diet is monotonous and nutritionally limited. Corn, beans, and squash provide the foundation, supplemented by whatever wild plants, small game, and insects you can gather or catch. Meat is a luxury reserved for special occasions or successful hunting trips. Salt is scarce and valuable, obtained through trade with coastal communities or from inland salt deposits controlled by nobles. The lack of variety in your diet leads to nutritional deficiencies that affect your health, energy levels, and ability to resist disease. Protein is limited, vitamins are scarce, and the high carbohydrate, low protein diet leaves you feeling hungry even after eating. The constant work in tropical heat, while nutritionally deficient, creates a cycle of exhaustion that makes every task more difficult. By midday, the heat has become almost unbearable. The Maya civilization flourished in what is now southern Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, and parts of Honduras and El Salvador, regions characterized by tropical and subtropical climates with high humidity, intense solar radiation, and limited cooling options. Your work continues regardless of the weather, because survival depends on completing daily tasks, whether you feel up to it or not. The afternoon brings new challenges as you continue your agricultural work, deal with social obligations, and prepare for evening activities. The heat makes thinking difficult, physical labor exhausting, and social interactions tense. Everyone is dealing with the same environmental stresses, which means tempers run short and conflicts can escalate quickly. Disease is a constant threat in Maya society. Without modern medicine, sanitation, or understanding of germ theory, common illnesses that would be minor inconveniences today could be death sentences. Tropical diseases like malaria, yellow fever, and dengue fever were endemic. Intestinal parasites were common due to contaminated water sources and poor sanitation. Respiratory infections spread rapidly in the crowded living conditions of Maya settlements. Injuries from work, warfare, or accidents often became infected, leading to systemic illness or death. The Maya had sophisticated knowledge of medicinal plants and healing practices, but their effectiveness was limited compared to modern medical intervention. A broken bone, deep cut, or severe burn could permanently disable you or prove fatal. Your life expectancy as a Maya commoner was significantly lower than modern standards. Infant mortality was high, childhood diseases claimed many lives, and the physical demands of daily life took a cumulative toll on health and longevity. Most commoners who survived childhood could expect to live perhaps into their 40s or 50s, with each year bringing new challenges and risks. The psychological stress of Maya life was as challenging as the physical demands. Living under constant threat of warfare, religious sacrifice, natural disasters, and social upheaval created chronic anxiety that affected every aspect of daily existence. The complex social hierarchies meant that a single mistake in protocol or judgment could have devastating consequences for you and your family. And we haven't even discussed the Maya ball game yet, or the complex astronomical observations that determined agricultural and religious timing, or the sophisticated trade networks that connected Maya communities across vast distances, or the architectural marvels that required enormous investments of labor and resources extracted from communities like yours. Your first day in the Maya Empire is far from over, and already you're exhausted, nutritionally deficient, socially stressed, religiously obligated, and acutely aware that your survival depends on successfully navigating a complex civilization that sees you as expendable. The romantic notions of ancient civilizations quickly fade when confronted with the daily realities of actually living within their social, economic, and political structures. But this is just the beginning of your Maya experience. As the day continues, you'll encounter even more challenges that will test your ability to survive in one of the most sophisticated, demanding, and unforgiving civilizations in human history. The rise and fall of Kainich Janab Pakal, the boy king who ruled for 68 years. Now that we've thoroughly established why your first few hours as a Maya commoner would be an exercise in survival, let's shift our focus to someone who had a decidedly different experience in Maya society. While you're struggling with limestone water and obsidian farming tools, there lived a man whose story embodies both the pinnacle of Maya achievement and the crushing weight of divine responsibility that came with ultimate power. Meet Kainich Janab Pakal, better known to history simply as Pakal the Great, who became ruler of the powerful city-state of Palenque in 615 CE, when he was just 12 years old. If you think your hypothetical day in Maya society is challenging, imagine being handed absolute power over thousands of people, responsibility for maintaining cosmic balance, and the expectation that you'll successfully communicate with gods who demand regular blood offerings, all before you've hit puberty. Pakal's story begins in the early 7th century, during what archaeologists call the classic period of Maya civilization. This was the height of Maya power, when great city-states like Tikal, Palenque, and Karakul controlled vast territories and engaged in complex political alliances and devastating warfare. Into this world of political intrigue and religious complexity was born a boy, who would become one of the longest ruling monarchs in human history. But Pakal's path to the throne wasn't straightforward, and his early reign was marked by challenges that would have destroyed a lesser ruler. Palenque had been suffering under the dominance of Calakmal, one of the two great superpowers of the Maya world. The city had endured military defeats, tribute obligations, and the humiliation of having its previous rulers captured and sacrificed by their enemies. When Pakal inherited the throne, he was taking control of a weakened state surrounded by powerful enemies who had every reason to believe this child king would be easy prey. The political situation Pakal inherited was dizzyingly complex. The Maya world wasn't a single empire, but rather a collection of competing city-states, each controlling territory that might extend for dozens of miles in every direction. These states formed alliances, waged wars, extracted tribute, and engaged in diplomatic marriages, all while maintaining the fiction that their rulers were divine beings in direct communication with the gods. The two great superpowers of Pakal's time were Tikal and Calakmul, massive city-states that controlled vast networks of smaller allied and tributary cities. These superpowers had been locked in what scholars call the Star Wars conflict, a series of campaigns that lasted for over a century and drew in city-states across the Maya lowlands. Palenque had the misfortune of being caught between these giants, and previous rulers had made the strategic mistake of aligning with Tikal against the ultimately more powerful Calakmul. When Pakal became king, Palenque was essentially a client state of Calakmul, paying tribute and providing military support when demanded. For a 12-year-old, even one who had been trained from birth for leadership, the pressure must have been overwhelming. He was expected to make decisions that would determine whether his people lived or died, whether his city prospered or was destroyed, and whether the gods continued to favor his rule or decided to support his enemies instead. Maya kingship wasn't just political leadership. It was a sacred office that required the ruler to serve as an intermediary between the human and divine realms. Kings were expected to perform elaborate bloodletting ceremonies, often piercing their tongues or genitals with obsidian blades or stingray spines to provide blood offerings to the gods. They had to time military campaigns according to astronomical observations, ensure that agricultural cycles were properly blessed, and maintain the cosmic balance that kept the world functioning. The regalia and ceremonies of Maya kingship were designed to reinforce the divine nature of royal power. Kings wore elaborate costumes featuring jade ornaments, feathered headdresses, and textiles that took months to create. They carried ceremonial weapons and shields decorated with religious imagery. During public ceremonies, they wore masks representing gods or mythological figures, literally becoming divine beings in the eyes of their subjects. But for all the divine trappings, Maya kings also had to be practical politicians and military leaders. They needed to navigate complex alliance systems, manage tribute collection, oversee massive construction projects, and personally lead their armies into battle. The combination of religious, political, and military responsibilities required intelligence, charisma, physical courage, and political cunning. Most importantly, it required the ability to project strength and confidence even when facing seemingly impossible challenges. Pakal's early reign was a masterclass in political survival. Rather than attempting to immediately challenge Calakmel's dominance, he focused on consolidating power within Palenque and strengthening his city's economic and military capabilities. He initiated construction projects that provided employment for commoners while demonstrating royal power. He carefully managed relationships with neighboring smaller cities, building a network of allies who could provide support when the time came to assert independence. One of Pakal's most significant early achievements was establishing the legitimacy of his rule through genealogical and mythological claims. Maya kings derived their authority not just from military success or political acumen, but from their connection to divine ancestors and mythological founders. Pakal commissioned scribes, to create detailed records of his lineage, connecting his family to the gods who had created the world and established the proper order of Maya society. These genealogical records weren't just historical documents, they were political weapons. By demonstrating his divine ancestry, Pakal was asserting that his rule was ordained by the gods themselves, and that opposition to his authority was tantamount to opposing divine will. The famous sarcophagus lid from his tomb in the Temple of Inscriptions depicts him at the moment of death and rebirth, surrounded by mythological imagery that reinforces his divine nature and his role in maintaining cosmic balance. The creation of these records required sophisticated knowledge of Maya writing, astronomy, and mythology. Pakal worked with scribes and priests to develop inscriptions that were simultaneously historical records, religious documents, and political propaganda. The Temple of Inscriptions at Palenque contains one of the longest Maya texts ever discovered, a detailed account of Pakal's reign and his place in both historical and mythological time. As Pakal matured from adolescence into adulthood, he began to assert Palenque's independence more aggressively. In 659 CE, when he was in his 50s and had been ruling for over 40 years, he launched a military campaign against Pomona, a city allied with Cozumel. This wasn't just a territorial expansion, it was a direct challenge to Cozumel's authority and a declaration that Palenque was no longer willing to accept subordinate status. The campaign against Pomona was successful, but it marked the beginning of a new phase in Pakal's reign, characterized by increased military activity and political risk-taking. He followed up the Pomona victory with attacks on other Cozumel allies, gradually building a coalition of cities that supported Palenque's bid for regional dominance. Each victory brought new tribute, new allies, and new prestige, but also increased the likelihood that Cozumel would respond with overwhelming force. Maya warfare during Pakal's time was a complex mixture of ritual, politics, and practical military objectives. Battles weren't fought simply to kill enemies or capture territory. They were elaborate ceremonies designed to demonstrate divine favor and political legitimacy. Warriors wore costumes representing gods and mythological figures. Weapons and shields were decorated with religious imagery. The timing of campaigns was determined by astronomical observations and religious calendars. The goal of Maya warfare wasn't typically the complete destruction of enemy cities, but rather the capture of high-status prisoners who could be sacrificed in elaborate ceremonies. The most prized captives were enemy kings and nobles, whose sacrifice would demonstrate the victor's divine favor and political superiority. These ceremonies were public spectacles that reinforced social hierarchy and religious beliefs, while serving as effective psychological warfare against potential enemies. Pakal's military campaigns were carefully orchestrated political theater designed to project power and divine favor. His armies would have been accompanied by priests carrying religious paraphernalia, musicians playing ceremonial instruments, and artists ready to record victories in sculptures and inscriptions. The king himself would have worn elaborate costumes and carried ceremonial weapons that identified him as a divine warrior, carrying out the will of the gods. The logistics of Maya warfare were formidable challenges in themselves. Armies had to be supplied with food, water, weapons, and ceremonial equipment while moving through difficult jungle terrain. Communication between units required runners who could cover long distances quickly and accurately. Intelligence about enemy movements and intentions had to be gathered through networks of spies and allies. Medical care for wounded warriors was limited to traditional healing practices that were often inadequate for serious injuries. Despite these challenges, Pakal's military campaigns were generally successful, and by the later years of his reign, Palenque had established itself as one of the major powers in the Maya world. The city controlled an extensive territory, extracted tribute from numerous smaller settlements, and had formed alliance relationships with other powerful city-states. Pakal had transformed Palenque from a weak client state into a regional superpower capable of challenging even Kalok. But military success was only one aspect of Pakal's achievements as king. He was also responsible for some of the most impressive architectural and artistic accomplishments in Maya history. The palace complex at Palenque, with its distinctive tower and elaborate courtyards, was expanded and beautified during his reign. The Temple of Inscriptions, which serves as his tomb, is considered one of the masterpieces of Maya architecture and contains some of the most sophisticated stone carving ever produced in ancient America. These construction projects weren't just demonstrations of royal wealth and power. They were complex religious and political statements designed to reinforce Pakal's divine authority and ensure his successful transition to the afterlife. The Temple of Inscriptions, in particular, was designed as a cosmic diagram that would guide Pakal's soul through the underworld and ensure his rebirth as a god. The elaborate burial chamber deep within the pyramid contains a stone sarcophagus covered with carvings that depict his death, journey through the underworld, and eventual resurrection. The construction of these monuments required enormous investments of labor, resources, and artistic skill. Thousands of workers were needed to quarry stone, transport building materials, and carry out the actual construction. Skilled artisans created the elaborate sculptures and inscriptions that decorated the buildings. Engineers designed drainage systems, structural supports, and architectural features that have survived for over 1,000 years. The economic impact of these construction projects on Maya society was significant. They provided employment for craftspeople and laborers, stimulated trade in luxury materials like jade and obsidian, and demonstrated the prosperity and stability of Pakal's rule. But they also required enormous tribute payments from subject communities and labor, obligations that took farmers away from agricultural work during critical planting and harvesting seasons. Pakal's personal life, insofar as we can reconstruct it from archaeological and historical evidence, reflects the complex demands of Maya kingship. He was married to Lady Sokbua, also known as Lady Opohel, who came from a powerful noble family and brought political alliances and legitimacy to his rule. Maya royal marriages were political arrangements designed to cement alliances, transfer property rights, and ensure the succession of legitimate heirs. The couple had several children, including Kanechkanbolam, too, who would eventually succeed Pakal as king of Palenque. Raising royal children in Maya society involved intensive education in religious practices, political protocol, military skills, and the complex knowledge required for effective rulership. Royal children were trained from early childhood to assume positions of leadership and responsibility that would determine the fate of thousands of people. As Pakal aged, he became increasingly focused on ensuring a smooth succession and preserving his legacy for future generations. The elaborate tomb he constructed within the Temple of Inscriptions was designed not just as a final resting place, but as a continuing source of political and religious authority for his successors. The inscriptions within the tomb detail his achievements and divine status, serving as a permanent reminder of his successful reign and divine favor. The final years of Pakal's reign were marked by continued military success, monumental construction projects, and the consolidation of Palenque's position as one of the great powers of the Maya world. He had successfully transformed a weak and threatened city-state into a regional superpower that could compete with Tikal and Calakmul on equal terms. His architectural and artistic achievements had created a lasting legacy that would inspire future generations of Maya rulers. When Pakal died in 683 CE at the age of 80, after ruling for 68 years, he left behind a transformed Palenque and a model of successful Maya kingship that would influence rulers throughout the region. His tomb became a pilgrimage site. His inscriptions served as historical records and political propaganda, and his architectural achievements demonstrated the artistic and engineering capabilities of Maya civilization at its height. But Pakal's story also illustrates the crushing burden of Maya kingship and the personal cost of absolute power. He spent his entire adult life managing complex political relationships, conducting religious ceremonies that required personal bloodletting and sacrifice, leading military campaigns against dangerous enemies, and making decisions that determined whether his people lived or died. The divine authority that made his rule possible also isolated him from normal human relationships and subjected him to constant pressure to demonstrate his worthiness through military success, religious devotion, and architectural achievement. The boy who became king at 12 had to learn quickly how to navigate palace intrigue, religious obligations, and military threats that would have challenged experienced adults. He had to project confidence and divine authority even when facing seemingly impossible odds. He had to make life and death decisions about warfare, sacrifice, and resource allocation while maintaining the religious ceremonies and political relationships that legitimized his rule. Pakal's 68-year reign represents both the pinnacle of Maya achievement and a reminder of the enormous personal costs of power in ancient civilizations. His success came at the expense of thousands of commoners who provided the labor, tribute, and military service that made his achievements possible. His divine authority was maintained through religious ceremonies that included human sacrifice and bloodletting rituals that caused genuine suffering and death. While you struggle through your hypothetical day as a Maya commoner, dealing with limestone water and obsidian tools, remember that somewhere in a palace overlooking the city, rulers like Pakal were making decisions that would determine your fate, conducting ceremonies that might require your blood or your life, and pursuing political and military objectives that would shape the world you were forced to inhabit. The magnificent achievements of Maya civilization were built on the backs of ordinary people whose names were never recorded in stone inscriptions, but whose labor and sacrifice made everything else possible. Pakal's story reminds us that even at the pinnacle of Maya society, life was a constant struggle against political enemies, religious obligations, and the crushing weight of responsibility for maintaining cosmic balance and social order. The boy king who ruled for nearly 7 decades achieved greatness, but at a cost that few modern people would be willing to pay. The mystery of the sacred cenotes, windows to the underworld, and Maya sacrificial practices. While Pakal was building his empire and you're struggling with your daily survival as a commoner, there existed throughout the Maya world mysterious places that served as doorways between the realm of the living and the domain of the gods. These were the cenotes, natural limestone sinkholes filled with water that the Maya believed were sacred portals to Xibalba, the underworld ruled by the death gods. What archaeologists have discovered in these watery depths reveals some of the most fascinating and disturbing aspects of Maya religious practice, offering us a window into beliefs and ceremonies that would have terrified and amazed ancient peoples as much as they intrigue us today. The word cenote comes from the Maya word jonot, meaning sacred well, and these geological formations were far more than simple water sources. They were considered sacred spaces where the boundary between the physical and spiritual worlds became permeable, places where humans could communicate directly with the gods through offerings, ceremonies, and ultimately sacrifice. To understand why the Maya viewed these water-filled caverns as divine, we need to explore their complex cosmological beliefs and the role that water played in their understanding of life, death, and rebirth. Maya cosmology divided the universe into three primary realms: the heavens above, the earthly plane where humans lived, and Xibalba, the underworld below. These realms were not separate but interconnected through various portals and pathways. Cenotes, with their dark waters extending deep into the earth, were seen as direct connections to Xibalba, the realm of the death gods, where souls journeyed after death, and from which they might eventually be reborn. The Maya creation myth, recorded in the Popol Vuh, describes how the hero twins journeyed to Xibalba to challenge the death gods and ultimately achieved victory through cleverness and divine intervention. This mythological narrative established the underworld not as a place of eternal punishment, but as a realm that could be navigated successfully by those with proper knowledge and divine favor. Cenotes became the physical manifestation of this mythological geography, offering access to the underworld for those brave or desperate enough to attempt communication with its inhabitants. Water itself held profound religious significance in Maya culture. In a civilization dependent on agricultural cycles and vulnerable to droughts that could last for years, water was quite literally the difference between life and death. The Maya rain god Chok was one of the most important deities in their pantheon, responsible for bringing the seasonal rains that made agriculture possible. Cenotes, as sources of fresh water in a region with few rivers or lakes, were naturally associated with Chok and viewed as sacred spaces where his favor could be sought and his anger appeased. But cenotes were more than just places to pray for rain. Archaeological investigations of cenotes throughout the Maya region have revealed that these sites were used for elaborate religious ceremonies involving offerings of precious objects, food, incense, and human beings. The most famous of these sites is the sacred cenote at Chichen Itza, but similar discoveries have been made in cenotes throughout the Yucatan Peninsula and other Maya regions. The sacred cenote at Chichen Itza, also known as the Cenote of Sacrifice, is a massive natural well approximately 60 meters in diameter and 15 meters deep to the water surface. The water itself extends another 15 meters down, creating a total depth of about 30 meters from surface to bottom. The cenote's walls are nearly vertical limestone cliffs that would have made escape impossible for anyone who entered the water unwillingly. Spanish colonial accounts from the 16th century described this cenote as a place where the Maya conducted human sacrifices, throwing victims into the water along with offerings of gold, jade, and other precious materials. For centuries, these accounts were dismissed by scholars as exaggerated colonial propaganda designed to justify Spanish conquest and conversion efforts. The Maya, after all, were portrayed by early archaeologists as a peaceful civilization of astronomer priests focused on intellectual pursuits rather than bloody religious practices. This romanticized view of Maya civilization began to change in the early 20th century, when archaeological investigations of the sacred cenote revealed clear evidence that the Spanish accounts were not exaggerations, but accurate descriptions of religious practices that had continued for centuries. Between 1904 and 1907, American consul and amateur archaeologist Edward Thompson conducted the first systematic exploration of the cenote, using diving equipment and dredging operations to recover artifacts from the muddy bottom. Thompson's discoveries were extraordinary and disturbing. From the depths of the cenote, he recovered thousands of artifacts, including gold discs, jade ornaments, copper bells, obsidian knives, copal incense, wooden objects, textiles, and human bones. The human remains showed clear evidence of violent death, including skulls with fractures consistent with blunt force trauma and bones bearing cut marks that suggested dismemberment or defleshing rituals. Subsequent archaeological investigations using more sophisticated techniques have expanded our understanding of cenote sacrificial practices. Modern underwater archaeology has revealed that the sacred cenote contains the remains of over 200 individuals, including men, women, and children, ranging in age from infants to elderly adults. The demographic distribution of victims suggests that sacrificial selection was based on religious and ceremonial requirements rather than simple demographic availability. The human remains show evidence of various forms of ritual treatment before and after death. Some individuals appear to have been killed elsewhere and then thrown into the cenote, while others may have been drowned in the sacred waters themselves. Cut marks on bones suggest that some bodies were dismembered or defleshed as part of the ceremonial process. The presence of both articulated skeletons and scattered individual bones indicates that different types of sacrificial rituals were performed over the centuries of the cenote's use. Carbon dating of organic materials from the cenote reveals that sacrificial activities took place over a period of more than 1,000 years. From the late Classic period through the post-Classic period and into the early colonial era. This suggests that cenote sacrifice was not a short-lived religious fad, but a deeply ingrained aspect of Maya religious practice that persisted through major political and cultural changes. The artifacts recovered from cenotes provide insight into the geographic extent of Maya trade networks and the cosmopolitan nature of these sacrificial ceremonies. Gold objects show artistic influences from as far away as Colombia and Panama. Jade ornaments were crafted from stone quarried in the Jaguar Valley of Guatemala. Obsidian blades came from volcanic sources in central Mexico. These materials represent enormous investments of wealth and demonstrate that cenote sacrifices were major religious events that attracted participants and offerings from throughout Mesoamerica. The religious ceremonies associated with cenote sacrifice were elaborate multi-day events that involved entire communities. Based on artistic depictions and archaeological evidence, these ceremonies began with ritual fasting and purification by participants. Priests conducted astronomical observations to determine auspicious timing for the ceremonies. Musicians played drums, flutes, and other instruments, while dancers performed in elaborate costumes representing gods and mythological figures. The actual sacrifice appears to have taken place at dawn, the time when the boundary between night and day, darkness and light, death and life was considered most permeable. Victims were brought to the edge of the cenote, dressed in elaborate costumes and jewelry that identified them with specific deities. Precious offerings were thrown into the water first, followed by the human sacrifices. But here's where the story becomes even more complex and disturbing. Archaeological evidence suggests that not all cenote victims were unwilling sacrifices. Some individuals appear to have been volunteers who sought divine favor, healing from illness, or spiritual transformation through ritual death and rebirth. Maya religion included concepts of voluntary sacrifice as a path to divine communion and posthumous deification. The selection of sacrificial victims followed complex religious protocols based on Maya calendar calculations, astronomical observations, and the specific needs of particular ceremonies. Children were often chosen for sacrifices to Chok during drought periods, as their tears were believed to encourage the rain god to provide moisture for crops. Warriors captured in battle were preferred victims for ceremonies celebrating military victories or seeking divine favor for future campaigns. Women were sometimes selected for sacrifices related to fertility and agricultural abundance, particularly during planting and harvesting seasons. Elderly individuals might be chosen for ceremonies related to ancestor veneration and communication with the spirits of the dead. The physically disabled or individuals with distinctive physical characteristics were sometimes viewed as having special connections to the divine realm and selected for sacrifice accordingly. The preparation of sacrificial victims involved elaborate rituals designed to transform them into suitable offerings for the gods. Victims were dressed in costumes and ornaments that identified them with specific deities. Their bodies were painted with sacred designs using pigments that had religious significance. They participated in fasting, purification ceremonies, and ritual bloodletting that prepared them spiritually for their transformation from human beings into divine messengers. The psychological impact of these ceremonies on Maya communities cannot be overstated. The public nature of cenote sacrifices meant that entire populations witnessed the religious theater of human beings being transformed into divine offerings. These events reinforced religious beliefs, demonstrated the power of the priest class, and created shared community experiences that strengthened social bonds while simultaneously instilling fear of divine displeasure. For individuals living in Maya society, the possibility of being selected for cenote sacrifice added another layer of uncertainty and fear to already challenging lives. While the probability of selection was relatively low for most people, the knowledge that religious authorities had the power to demand ultimate sacrifice created psychological pressure that influenced behavior, religious observance, and social relationships. The cenotes also served as repositories for offerings that weren't directly related to human sacrifice. During periods of drought, disease, or military threat, Maya communities would gather at cenotes to make offerings of food, flowers, incense, and precious objects. These ceremonies were community events that brought together people from multiple settlements to participate in shared religious observances designed to ensure divine favor and protection. Archaeological investigation of cenotes has revealed seasonal patterns in the types and quantities of offerings deposited in sacred waters. During dry seasons, offerings included more items related to agricultural fertility and water procurement. During wet seasons, offerings focused more on items related to successful harvests and protection from floods and storms. Military campaigns were preceded by offerings of weapons and warrior costumes, while periods of political instability saw increases in offerings of jade and gold items, representing wealth and status. The cenotes also functioned as libraries of religious and historical information. Maya priests, through codices, bark paper books containing religious texts, historical records, and astronomical calculations, into cenotes as offerings to the gods. Most of these organic materials have decomposed over the centuries, but fragments recovered from cenotes have provided valuable information about Maya writing, religious practices, and historical events that would otherwise be unknown. The practice of cenote sacrifice continued well into the colonial period, despite Spanish efforts to suppress indigenous religious practices. Colonial documents record instances of Maya communities secretly continuing sacrificial ceremonies at remote cenotes, risking severe punishment from Spanish colonial authorities. The persistence of these practices demonstrates the deep religious significance of cenotes in Maya culture and the difficulty colonial authorities faced in completely suppressing indigenous beliefs. Modern archaeological investigation of cenotes continues to reveal new information about Maya religious practices and cultural beliefs. Advanced underwater archaeology techniques, including remote sensing equipment and sophisticated diving apparatus, have allowed researchers to explore cenotes that were previously inaccessible. These investigations have revealed that sacrificial practices were far more widespread than previously thought, with evidence of ritual activity found in cenotes throughout the Maya region. The scientific analysis of human remains from cenotes has provided detailed information about the health, diet, and demographics of sacrificial victims. Isotope analysis of bones and teeth has revealed information about where victims lived before their sacrifice, suggesting that some individuals were brought from distant regions specifically for cenote ceremonies. This evidence supports the idea that major cenote sacrifices were regional events that attracted participants from throughout the Maya world. DNA analysis of human remains has revealed family relationships among some sacrificial victims, suggesting that certain ceremonies involved the sacrifice of related individuals, possibly entire families or lineages. This evidence challenges earlier assumptions about random victim selection and suggests that cenote sacrifice involved complex social and political considerations that went beyond simple religious requirements. The discovery of cenote sacrificial practices has fundamentally changed our understanding of Maya civilization, revealing a culture that combines sophisticated, intellectual achievements with religious practices that included regular human sacrifice. The same civilization that developed complex writing systems, accurate astronomical observations, and impressive architectural achievements also conducted elaborate ceremonies that involved throwing human beings into sacred wells. This apparent contradiction between intellectual sophistication and ritual violence reflects the complex nature of Maya religious beliefs and the central role that sacrifice played in maintaining cosmic balance. From the Maya perspective, human sacrifice wasn't evidence of primitive barbarity, but rather a sophisticated religious technology, designed to ensure the continued functioning of the universe and the favor of the gods who controlled natural forces essential for human survival. For Maya commoners living near cenotes, these sacred sites represented both spiritual comfort and existential threat. The same cenotes that provided fresh water for daily survival also served as places where community members might be selected for sacrifice. The religious ceremonies that brought communities together in shared worship also demonstrated the awesome power of religious authorities to demand ultimate sacrifice from ordinary people. As you struggle through your hypothetical day in Maya society, the knowledge that sacred cenotes, the landscape around you, adds another dimension to the psychological pressure of survival. These dark pools of water, beautiful and terrifying in equal measure, serve as constant reminders that Maya civilization viewed human life as one resource among many that could be offered to the gods in exchange for divine favor and cosmic stability. The mystery of the cenotes reveals the complex relationship between beauty and terror, intellectual achievement and religious violence, community solidarity and individual vulnerability that characterized Maya civilization at its height. These sacred wells, with their clear blue waters and vertical limestone walls, represent one of the most haunting aspects of a culture that achieved greatness, while demanding terrible prices from its people. Life among the Maya elite, palace intrigue, divine luxury, and the burden of perfection. While you've been struggling through your grueling day as a Maya commoner, and we've explored the weight of divine kingship and the mysteries of sacrificial cenotes, there exists another layer of Maya society that lived in a world so removed from common experience that it might as well have been on another planet. These were the Maya elite, the nobles, high priests, and royal families who inhabited palace complexes that were marvels of architecture, luxury, and sophistication. But don't mistake their privileged position for an easy life. The Maya elite lived in a golden cage of ritual obligations, political intrigue, and social expectations that were every bit as demanding and dangerous as the challenges faced by commoners, just wrapped in jade ornaments and fine cotton textiles. Let's step into the palace complex at Palenque during the height of Pakal's reign, around 650 CE, and experience what daily life was like for someone born into the highest levels of Maya society. Imagine your Lady Kinu Mat, a fictional but archaeologically plausible noblewoman married to one of Pakal's court officials. Your day begins not with the harsh realities of agricultural labor or the fear of sacrifice, but with an elaborate series of rituals designed to maintain your divine status and fulfill your obligations to the cosmic order that keeps Maya civilization functioning. Your sleeping quarters occupy an entire section of the palace complex, with plastered walls decorated with intricate murals depicting mythological scenes and historical events. The floors are covered with woven mats made from the finest materials available, some imported from distant regions through trade networks that span thousands of miles. Your bed isn't the reed mat of a commoner, but a raised wooden platform covered with cotton textiles so finely woven that they feel like silk against your skin. But luxury comes with a price, and that price is measured in ritual obligations that begin before dawn. As a member of the elite, you're expected to participate in daily bloodletting ceremonies that demonstrate your piety and maintain your connection to the divine realm. This isn't the occasional ritual bloodletting that commoners might perform during major festivals. This is a daily requirement that involves piercing your tongue with obsidian blades or stingray spines and collecting your blood on bark paper that will be burned as an offering to the gods. The pain is real, the blood is real, and the risk of infection or other complications is constant. But refusing to participate isn't an option. Your divine status depends on demonstrating your willingness to sacrifice for the gods, and any sign of reluctance or impiety could result in loss of status, exile, or worse. The same luxury that cushions your physical existence also traps you in a web of religious obligations that demand genuine sacrifice on a daily basis. Your morning toilette is an elaborate affair that requires the assistance of multiple servants and takes several hours to complete. Your hair must be arranged in complex styles that indicate your social status and family affiliations. Different hairstyles were associated with different social ranks, ages, and ceremonial roles, and wearing the wrong style could be interpreted as a serious breach of protocol that reflects poorly on your family's honor and political position. Your clothing is a form of wearable art that takes months to create and represents enormous investments of labor and resources. Elite Maya women wore hooples made from cotton so fine that it was reserved exclusively for the nobility. These garments were decorated with intricate embroidery using threads dyed with expensive pigments, some imported from regions hundreds of miles away. The designs weren't merely decorative but carried religious and political significance, identifying your family lineage, social rank, and ceremonial roles. The jewelry you wear each day represents more wealth than most commoners will see in their entire lifetimes. Jade ornaments were particularly prized, with the finest pieces reserved for royal families and the highest-ranking nobles. Your jade earfleurs, necklaces, and bracelets aren't just beautiful accessories, but religious artifacts believed to have protective and spiritual powers. The jade was often carved with religious imagery and inscribed with hieroglyphic texts that identified you with specific deities and mythological figures. But perhaps the most striking aspect of elite Maya appearance was the practice of cranial modification and dental decoration. As a member of the nobility, your skull was bound as an infant to create the elongated head shape that the Maya considered beautiful and divinely inspired. Your teeth were inlaid with jade, obsidian, or hematite, creating a distinctive appearance that immediately identified your social status and access to skilled craftspeople. These physical modifications weren't cosmetic choices, but permanent markers of social identity that shaped how others perceived and interacted with you throughout your life. The elongated skull shape was believed to make you more receptive to divine communication and wisdom. The dental inlays demonstrated your family's wealth and your access to skilled artisans who could perform these delicate procedures without causing permanent damage or infection. Your daily schedule is determined not by agricultural cycles or survival needs, but by the complex Maya calendar system and the religious ceremonies that mark significant dates in the ritual year. As a noblewoman, you were expected to participate in ceremonies celebrating agricultural cycles, astronomical events, historical anniversaries, and religious festivals. Each ceremony requires specific costumes, knowledge of ritual protocols, and the ability to perform your role with dignity and precision. The palace complex where you live is a world unto itself, with courtyards, residential areas, administrative buildings, temples, and gardens that create a self-contained environment designed to demonstrate royal power and divine favor. The architecture is a masterpiece of engineering and artistry, with corbelled arches, elaborate stone carvings, and sophisticated drainage systems that make the palace comfortable even during the intense tropical rains of the wet season. The palace walls are covered with murals that serve as both decoration and political propaganda, depicting historical events, mythological scenes, and genealogical information that reinforces the divine nature of royal authority. These aren't simple pictures, but complex visual narratives that require sophisticated knowledge of Maya history, mythology, and political relationships to fully understand. As a member of the elite, you're expected to be literate enough to read these visual tales and interpret their political and religious significance. Your daily diet reflects the finest foods available in the Maya world, but even elite dining comes with ritual obligations and social complications. You have access to chocolate drinks flavored with honey, vanilla, and chili peppers, a luxury reserved for the nobility and used in religious ceremonies. Your meals include venison, turkey, fish, and other protein sources that are rare treats for commoners, along with fruits, vegetables, and spices imported from distant regions through elite trade networks. But elite dining isn't just about consuming luxury foods. It's about participating in social rituals that reinforce hierarchical relationships and political alliances. Formal meals are elaborate affairs with specific seating arrangements, serving protocols, and conversational requirements that reflect and reinforce social status. Knowing how to behave appropriately at these events requires extensive education in court etiquette and political protocol. The palace is also a center of intellectual and artistic activity that requires elite participation and patronage. You're expected to support scribes, artists, astronomers, and other specialists who create the cultural products that define Maya civilization. This might involve commissioning artwork for religious ceremonies, supporting the creation of codices containing historical or astronomical information, or patronizing musicians and dancers who perform at court events. Your education as an elite Maya woman includes literacy in the complex Maya writing system, knowledge of astronomical calculations used for ritual timing, understanding of genealogical relationships that determine political alliances, and familiarity with the vast body of religious and mythological knowledge that underlies Maya culture. This education begins in early childhood and continues throughout your life, as political and religious circumstances require constant updating of your knowledge and skills. But intellectual accomplishment comes with social isolation that separates you from the daily experiences of ordinary Maya people. You live in a rarefied atmosphere of court politics, religious ceremony, and cultural refinement that has little connection to the agricultural cycles, market activities, and survival struggles that define life for the vast majority of your society. This isolation makes you dependent on intermediaries and advisors for information about conditions outside the palace, creating opportunities for manipulation and misinformation that can have serious political consequences. The political environment of the Maya elite is characterized by constant competition, alliance formation, and the ever-present threat of losing status through political miscalculation or divine disfavor. Elite families compete for royal favor, ceremonial roles, and marriage alliances that can elevate or destroy their political positions. Success requires not just intelligence and social skills, but also the ability to navigate complex webs of kinship relationships, historical grievances, and shifting political loyalties. Marriage among the Maya elite is a political institution designed to create alliances, transfer property rights, and produce legitimate heirs who can continue family lines and political influence. As an elite woman, your marriage was arranged to serve your family's political interests, rather than your personal preferences. Your husband may be someone you've never met before your wedding ceremony, chosen for his political connections rather than personal compatibility. Elite Maya marriages often involved complex negotiations over bride prices, property transfers, and political obligations that could take months or years to complete. The wedding ceremony itself was an elaborate public event designed to demonstrate the family's wealth, status, and political connections. The celebration could last for days and involve hundreds of guests from throughout the Maya world. But marriage doesn't end your political obligations, it transforms them. As an elite wife, you're expected to maintain your own political relationships, while supporting your husband's career and raising children who will continue your family's political influence. You may be called upon to serve as a diplomatic intermediary, using your kinship connections to negotiate alliances or resolve conflicts between competing political factions. Children among the Maya elite involves preparing the next generation for the complex demands of maintaining divine authority and political power. Elite children begin their education almost from birth, learning the ritual protocols, political relationships, and cultural knowledge they'll need to function effectively in Maya high society. This education is intensive and demanding, requiring mastery of complex intellectual skills along with the social graces needed for court life. Elite children undergo the same physical modifications as their parents, including cranial binding and dental decoration, but they also receive specialized training in warfare, diplomacy, religious practices, and administrative skills. Boys are prepared for potential roles as warriors, priests, or political administrators, while girls are educated in the skills needed for diplomatic marriages and court politics. The pressure on elite children to succeed is enormous, as failure to meet expectations can result in loss of status for entire families. Children who show intellectual promise may be selected for specialized training as scribes, astronomers, or priests, roles that require years of intensive study and practice. Those who demonstrate physical courage and leadership abilities may be groomed for military or political careers that could elevate their family's status. But elite childhood is also marked by isolation from normal social experiences and the constant awareness that political circumstances could change rapidly and dramatically. Elite children grow up surrounded by luxury, but also by the knowledge that their privileged position depends on maintaining divine favor and political alliances that are constantly shifting and potentially fragile. The daily routine of elite life includes participation in religious ceremonies that are far more elaborate and demanding than anything experienced by commoners. You're expected to know the proper rituals for dozens of different gods and goddesses. Understand the astronomical calculations that determine ceremonial timing, and possess the physical stamina needed for ceremonies that can last for hours or even days. These ceremonies often require physical discomfort and genuine sacrifice that demonstrate your devotion to the gods and your worthiness to maintain elite status. Elite bloodletting ceremonies involve more extensive cutting and blood loss than commoner rituals, reflecting the greater obligations that come with higher social position. You may be required to fast for days before important ceremonies, participate in all-night vigils, or endure physical trials that test your spiritual dedication. The palace complex where you live is also a center of administrative activity that governs the lives of thousands of Maya commoners throughout your region. As a member of the elite, you may be involved in tribute collection, legal proceedings, or resource allocation decisions that directly affect the welfare of ordinary people. These responsibilities require detailed knowledge of local conditions, legal precedents, and political relationships that influence how decisions are made and implemented. But administrative power also brings moral burdens that can be psychologically challenging. You may be required to make decisions about tribute levels that determine whether farming families have enough food to survive, participate in legal proceedings that result in slavery or execution for convicted criminals, or support military campaigns that will result in the deaths of soldiers and civilians from your own community. The justice system in Maya society reflects the rigid social hierarchies that govern all aspects of life. As an elite, you're subject to different legal standards than commoners, with greater privileges but also greater responsibilities. Elite crimes, particularly those involving religious transgression or political disloyalty, carry severe penalties that can include loss of status, exile, or execution. The same divine authority that elevates you above common society also subjects you to divine judgment that can be swift and merciless. Your daily interactions with servants and lower-ranking nobles require careful attention to protocol and social hierarchy. Every conversation, gesture, and decision carries potential political implications that could affect your family's status and influence. The wrong word to the wrong person at the wrong time could trigger conflicts that escalate into serious political problems with long-lasting consequences. The artistic and intellectual pursuits that occupy much of elite leisure time aren't simply recreational activities, but important cultural work that maintains Maya civilization's sophisticated traditions. Elite women often served as patrons for poets, musicians, and artists whose work celebrated family genealogies, religious beliefs, and political achievements. Supporting these cultural activities was both a privilege and an obligation that demonstrated your family's commitment to maintaining Maya cultural traditions. The religious knowledge required for elite participation in Maya ceremonies is encyclopedic in scope and constantly evolving. You must understand the mythological relationships between dozens of gods and goddesses, know the proper offerings and rituals for different occasions, and be able to interpret astronomical events according to Maya religious traditions. This knowledge isn't academic, but practical information needed for making decisions about timing ceremonies, selecting appropriate offerings, and conducting rituals that maintain divine favor. Trade relationships occupy a significant portion of elite attention and resources. As a noblewoman, you may be involved in managing long-distance trade, relationships that bring luxury goods to the palace and send Maya products to distant regions. These trade networks aren't just economic relationships, but political alliances that require careful maintenance and diplomatic skill to preserve. The goods that flow through these trade networks include not just luxury items, but also essential materials for religious ceremonies and political functions. Jade from Guatemala, obsidian from central Mexico, feathers from tropical regions, and shells from coastal areas all play important roles in Maya religious and political activities. Managing these supply chains requires understanding of regional politics, seasonal variations, and the complex social relationships that make long-distance trade possible. Your evening activities as an elite Maya woman might include attending court entertainments that are simultaneously social events and political theater. Elite gatherings feature elaborate performances including music, dance, storytelling, and dramatic presentations that require sophisticated cultural knowledge to fully appreciate. These events also serve as opportunities for political networking, alliance building, and competitive displays of wealth and cultural refinement. The entertainment at elite social events often includes performances of mythological tales that reinforce religious beliefs and political ideologies. Musicians and dancers perform complex pieces that require years of training and practice to master. The costumes, instruments, and staging for these performances represent enormous investments of resources and artistic skill that demonstrate the patron's wealth and cultural sophistication. Games and sporting events at elite gatherings aren't just entertainment, but religious ceremonies, with serious spiritual and political implications. The Maya ball game, played in specially constructed courts within palace complexes, was a ritual recreation of mythological events that determined cosmic balance and divine favor. Participating in or sponsoring these events required understanding of complex rules, religious symbolism, and political protocols that marked true elite status. The intellectual conversations that characterize elite social gatherings cover topics ranging from astronomical observations to historical interpretation to religious philosophy. As an elite woman, you're expected to contribute meaningfully to these discussions, demonstrating your education and cultural sophistication while carefully navigating the political implications of different intellectual positions. As your exhausting day of luxury and obligation draws to a close, you participate in evening religious observances that prepare you for sleep and ensure divine protection through the night. These ceremonies might include offerings of incense, recitation of prayers, and personal meditation that connects you to the spiritual forces that govern Maya cosmology. Your sleeping arrangements reflect both the luxury of elite status and the security concerns that govern palace life. Your private quarters are guarded by trusted servants and protected by religious symbols believed to ward off evil influences. The textiles, furniture, and decorative objects in your sleeping area are all chosen for their spiritual as well as aesthetic properties. But even in sleep, elite Maya life involves obligations and concerns that commoners never experience. Your dreams may be interpreted by court specialists for their political and religious significance. Your sleep schedule is influenced by astronomical events and religious calendar requirements that determine when certain activities can be performed. Even rest is regulated by the complex cultural systems that govern elite existence. The contrast between your luxurious but demanding life as a Maya elite and the survival struggles of commoners highlights the complex stratification of Maya society and the different but equally challenging demands placed on people at every social level. While commoners fought for physical survival, Elites fought for political survival in an environment where power and privilege came with obligations and risks that few modern people would willingly accept. Your position provides access to the finest material goods, the most sophisticated intellectual traditions, and the most beautiful artistic achievements that Maya civilization produced. But it also traps you in a web of expectations, obligations, and potential consequences that make every day a careful balancing act between personal desires and social demands, between human needs and divine requirements. The palace complex that shelters and constrains your daily life represents the pinnacle of Maya architectural and artistic achievement. But it's also a carefully controlled environment designed to maintain social hierarchies and political relationships that benefit some while constraining others. The beauty and sophistication of elite Maya culture can't be separated from the social systems that made such achievements possible through the labor and sacrifice of thousands of ordinary people. As we conclude our exploration of elite Maya life, we see how privilege and power in ancient civilizations came with costs and constraints that modern people, accustomed to individual freedom and personal choice, would find almost unbearable. The same cultural achievements that we admire in Maya civilization were built on social systems that demanded enormous sacrifices from people at every level of society. From the commoners who provided labor and tribute to the elites, who surrendered personal autonomy in exchange for luxury and power. As our journey through 24 hours in the Maya Empire comes to a close, we've witnessed the daily struggles of a commoner fighting for survival with limestone water and obsidian tools, followed the extraordinary political maneuvering of a divine king who ruled for nearly 7 decades, explored the mysterious and terrifying world of cenote sacrifice, where humans became offerings to appease the gods, and experienced the golden cage of elite privilege with its own unique burdens and dangers. What emerges from this exploration is a picture of Maya civilization that's far more complex and challenging than the romantic images often presented in popular media. This was a society that achieved remarkable intellectual and artistic heights while demanding enormous sacrifices from people at every level of the social hierarchy. The same culture that developed sophisticated mathematics, astronomy, and writing also practiced human sacrifice on a scale that would shock modern sensibilities. The Maya world was one where survival required not just physical endurance, but also political acumen, religious knowledge, and social skills that few modern people possess. Whether you were a commoner struggling with daily survival, a king managing complex political alliances while conducting bloody religious ceremonies, or an elite noble navigating palace intrigue while maintaining divine status, daily life was a constant challenge that tested human ingenuity, endurance, and adaptability. Perhaps most striking is how the challenges faced by Maya people at different social levels, while dramatically different in their specifics, all involved the same fundamental struggle to maintain position and security in a world where political, religious, and environmental forces could change rapidly and unpredictably. The commoners' daily fight for physical survival and the elite's constant maneuvering for political survival were different expressions of the same basic human need to create stability and meaning in an uncertain world. The Maya achieved greatness through the coordinated efforts of millions of people over centuries. But that greatness came at enormous personal cost for individuals at every social level. Their sophisticated calendar systems, monumental architecture, complex writing, and advanced astronomical knowledge were built on social foundations that demanded complete subordination of individual desires to collective needs as defined by religious and political authorities. As you settle into your comfortable modern bed tonight, with clean water flowing from taps, electric lights banishing the darkness, and medical care available when needed, take a moment to appreciate how different your daily challenges are from those faced by people in one of history's most sophisticated civilizations. The Maya achieved wonders that still inspire awe today, but at a cost that reminds us how precious and fragile the comforts and securities of modern life really are. The obsidian blades that cut through Maya daily life, both literally and metaphorically, serve as symbols of a civilization that was simultaneously brilliant and brutal, sophisticated and savage, beautiful and terrifying. Their legacy challenges us to consider what we're willing to sacrifice for collective achievement, and what prices we're willing to pay for the security and prosperity we enjoy. Sweet dreams, and thank you for joining us on this journey through the complex, fascinating, and often brutal world of the Maya Empire. If you've enjoyed this exploration of history's more challenging moments, consider subscribing for more stories from the past that help put our present struggles in perspective. Remember that you're part of our growing community of history enthusiasts who appreciate these quieter, more detailed journeys through time. Your support means everything to us as we continue exploring the fascinating, uncomfortable, and ultimately human stories that shaped our world. Until next time, sleep well, knowing that your biggest daily challenges probably don't involve obsidian blades, cenote sacrifices, or the constant threat of divine retribution. Good night from all of us here in our little corner of the internet, where we bring you the stories from history that are too fascinating to forget, even if they're sometimes too uncomfortable to contemplate while fully awake. Rest easy and dream of simpler times, though, as we've learned tonight, the past was anything but simple for those who lived it.